Peace. It's Bronzebird here with another video. Before I begin, like and subscribe. Thank you. So, I don't even know how to start off this video, but I do, right? So the thing about it is that, I remember at one time when I was involved in a whole entire liberal wormhole, and I was going to these protests for what was right and going ahead and saying, oh, the police need to be held accountable. And, well, in my city, the big deal was about police misconduct and gentrification. Those were the two top things that, New Yorkers, working class New Yorkers, were really more concerned about. The cost of living and just the way that they're being treated by the NYPD. Um, Otherwise than that, I mean, look, I remember at stake, you understand, like the whole entire thing, these big protests, these big, like, you know, uh, conglomerates or no, this big congregation of people coming together at places like what you call it, like West 4th Street, I guess, Washington Square Park, Union Square, and all this other stuff, and a bunch of people trying to think they're coming together for a common purpose of all different nationalities and races to talk about how they need to defund this and there needs to be this, that, and the third that happens around the world. Today, I wanted to get into this conversation about defund the police and, this whole entire thing of the active solutions they're trying to take to get rid of police departments or come along with having different ways of public safety. That's going to be today's topic. And in my honest opinion, do I believe in defunding the police? I mean, look, they're going to go with the records about what happened in the past, about how the police department started from slave catchers and this, that, and the third. And then, the whole entire thing about so-called white people, especially sometimes I hear the dialogue about Irish and more of them coming into the police department in the 1800s and all these different things. My theory is always simple. Pretty much anything in America has a racist background. It doesn't matter what it is. A lot of things in America have a racist background. So it doesn't surprise me. But this conversation about defund the police, it's like, okay, you're going to defund the police, but what are you going to replace it with? Who's going to be adequate of handling a firearm, or don't you want firearms? And which in my solution, well, which in my theory, my analysis, they don't want these new public safety officers to have guns. And honestly, in my opinion, if that was to come true, if the whole entire America wanted to defund the police, you would be witnessing a purge. The Purge, the movie, you know what I'm saying? A purge. People out there got like 24 hours to do whatever they want. They could go ahead and kill people and this, that, and the third. I mean, where do you put a foot down and say, okay, we understand what happened in the past? I mean, even on this video, they're going to be mentioning George Floyd. I understand what happened with George Floyd. I understand what happens with us as so-called Black men when it comes to police department and the relations between so-called Black men and police. But at the end of the day, I think it's a different era in time, in my honest opinion. It's not like how it was maybe in the 1980s up to like maybe the mid 2000s. And especially when in this city, they pulled something like the Stop and Frisk program by Mayor Bloomberg, in which it was all a mess. The whole entire thing that happened with the police, they just sit up there stopping any old so-called Black man and so-called Latina man and coming out with these inaccurate descriptions and trying to say we need to see your ID. We just want to make sure the community's safe. All that shit was bullshit. It was all about meeting a quota. And later on, later on in that the 2000s, you had a bunch of former NYPD officers say, hey, they want you to meet a quota. We're trying to stop and frisk or stop and search for so-called Black men and Latinos. But I'll give my analysis on the video as it plays and then just, give my final thoughts as usual. So Pete. Fair use.
Critical issues on the ballot in cities across the country today. In Minneapolis, an amendment would eliminate that city's police department altogether, replacing it with a new Department of Public Safety. The initiative would also get rid of the police chief and the city's required number of police officers.
CNN's Omar Jimenez has more on a movement that grew in the wake of George Floyd's murder.
Voting this season?
Leading up to Election Day, canvassers are making a final push to encourage people to vote yes on ballot question number 2 in Minneapolis.
That's what this new Department of Public Safety is about.
Which reads, in part, shall the Minneapolis City Charter be amended to remove the police department and replace it with the Department of Public Safety?
It's really setting the table, if you will, for policymakers in the future to come forward and say, what should be in the public safety department?
It's not abolishing the police department. It's not getting rid of police officers.
There are certain functions in our city that can only be done by licensed police officers. That doesn't change whether this amendment number 2 question passes or not.
Critical issues on the ballot in cities.
To remove the police department and replace
for policymakers in the future to come forward and say, what should be in the public safety department?
It's not abolishing the police department. It's not getting rid of police officers.
There are certain functions in our city that can only be done by licensed police officers. That doesn't change whether this amendment number 2 question passes or not.
And my thing about it is, sorry to go back, I didn't mean to do that, but my thing about it is that that's what community organizers are for. You know, my whole entire thing always goes back to the individual aspect. You want change in your community, you want to be able to do this thing of stop crime and all these different things, you start at the basic level. Honestly, if it really came to the case of, you know, the police and this, that, and third, what should be honestly done is the police officers need to be vetted. You know what I mean? I look, it would be one thing, because this is the thing. I have an understanding that the U.S., you know, they plan certain events. This whole entire thing that happened in Minneapolis, it was planned, okay? And I know that sounds very controversial to say, oh, how was it planned that a police officer put his neck on a black man and he died from this, that, and the third? Everything was about causing an uproar. You understand? Like, a lot of people might not understand what I'm saying, and, you know, they might think, oh, well, you know, blah, 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 blah. Now, in my opinion, I've actually learned this from a fellow YouTuber, you know, the whole entire thing and this concept of a Manchurian candidate, which I do more research on, but I know the basics of what it entails, right? And the thing about it is, I'm not saying that, you know, oh, that was the reason why, you know, the whole entire thing that happened with George Floyd happened. I'm not saying that. I believe if it was that, it had to be something that bad in Minneapolis besides George Floyd in order for everybody to come out, especially Black lesbians matter, to come out with this whole entire ploy of sitting up there talking about defund the police. You know, and I'm not denying there wasn't a string of crimes, but the honest truth about this, and especially when I talk about this topic of conversation, the only reason they started going out here protesting is because it was a dead Black man. And I say this all the time to brothers. I said the only time they really care about a so-called Black man is when he's dead in a casket 6 feet deep, especially when it comes to this whole entire thing about the defund the police or you know, protect the community. Everybody understands the so-called Black community revolves around women first, and then we're dead last. And the so-called Black woman only cares about race. The so-called Black woman cares about herself, okay? When she has to talk about race to include the so-called Black man, she gets upset about it. But when it comes to the so-called Black man being sacrificed and being put under the ground, that's when she wants to come out and cry about, oh, it's unfair in this country, and I'm scared for me, and this, that, and the third. And notice the language that they always use. They never sit up there and say, we need to protect the so-called Black man. I mean, they say it afterwards, but it's gonna take time for them to say it. But usually they never wanna really say that in conversation. And I know a lot of people is gonna disagree, but it's okay.
In the aftermath of George Floyd's murder, there were calls to defund and even dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department.
Ending the Minneapolis Police Department.
A year and a half and over 20,000 petition signatures later, those controversial ideas aren't quite on the ballot. But organizers say needed reform is.
If slogans get really popular, we also know that slogans are not policies. It does not abolish the police department, does not even really dismantle the police department. What it does is it makes it possible to expand it so that it becomes the Department of Public Safety, so that you can add other qualified professionals to it.
They hope the new department will include things like mental health professionals and violence prevention counselors, but the balance.
And honestly, in my opinion, when I hear stuff like that, it tells me it's more of like a virtual signal in order to program these police officers even more before going outside and dealing with everyday people and all this other stuff. It's to soften them up. You know what I mean? And say, think about your choices before you go ahead and arrest that man or check that man for something. You know, I mean, that's just in my opinion. Look, I'm not saying I know it all, but it just comes across that way.
The question doesn't include specifics that could only be hammered out if it passes and after the newly elected mayor and city council are sworn in.
There's too much at stake to just, say, well, vote for this. And vote for what?
Tito Wilson owns a Minneapolis barbershop and says he witnessed the police killing of Jamar Clark, a 24-year-old black man, in 2015.
Even after witnessing a police killing, after living here in Minneapolis through all that happened around the murder of George Floyd, you still feel the right way to go is vote no.
It feels like and sounds like an experiment. They have not been able to flush out from top to bottom what this Department of Public Safety is going to look like. To just say, hey, just trust us. We're going to put this together. We're going to make you safe.
In an honest opinion, what is going to entail with public safety if they start in Minneapolis and then spread it all around the country? You understand? How is it going to play out? Is it just going to be a group of particularly just random people who's like liberals, and these people out here that want to post up signs, are they going to be the same ones going out here? So let's just say something randomly happens. Are they going to be really efficient enough to deal with the crimes that happen in their area? You can't just vote on something with no backup plan. And the thing about it is, now if we ask for public safety, are they going to be able to allow to have firearms? Because it's going to be important. Let's just say if a bank robbery happens, or if something trivial, like everyday crime, someone's committing domestic violence or all these different things out here. What you gonna tell them? Just you're gonna hit them with some soft ass speech like just put the gun down. It's gonna be okay. We could work this out. Look, criminals are not gonna think like that. Criminals don't care. So it's just like, if you're gonna go ahead for public safety, what does that entail? Is it just being that it's I was about to say Homeland Security, or just like that movie back in 2003 with Martin Lawrence and that so-called white guy that was like, security guards or this, that, and well, they came on a police force and got demoted to being a security guard and all that other stuff. It did what happened in that movie, Next Friday, when Day took his job too seriously. Like, what is going to entail with public safety? What is that going to entail? And in my honest opinion, I'm going to give my thoughts later, but this is all a reason, okay? This is why I did a video earlier talking about how technology is important in this as well. And I'm going to tell you why in a little while, but let's continue the video.
It's reckless.
The chief of police also has concerns.
Again, I was not expecting some sort of robust, detailed word-for-word plan, but at this point, quite frankly, I would take a drawing on a napkin, and I have not seen either.
But advocates say it'll create the opportunity to make policing easier.
They will no longer have to be deployed in every single circumstance that we use 911 for.
I'm going to have somebody call you.
Back on the canvassing route, the needs are plain.
If it's not going to be any officers that can relate to what we go through out here,
Absolutely.
prejudice, racism, whatever we're up against, they got to be able to directly relate to that.
This armed police only.
What does that mean? Like, you hear what this brother said? What the fuck does that mean?
To that.
This armed.
Hold on, I'm sorry.
We're up against, they got to be able to directly relate to that.
what does that mean? Look, listen, and I'm really not trying to be judgmental of the brother, but just looking at the scenery about what's taking place, what the fuck is he talking about? That brother, and no lie, I'm really not trying to be judgmental, but like really analyze this for a second. That's a dude chilling on a corner with two other guys chilling on a corner. What do you need to relate to? How is a police officer going to relate to you, sir? Is he going to go over there and talk about, oh yeah, you guys are, playing dice, you guys are drinking 40s, and I'm sorry to do stereotypes about these so-called black men, but we have an understanding that you have street dwellers. And I'm sorry to say it, the brother looks like he could be a street dweller. Maybe I might be wrong. Maybe I might be making a wrong judgment call. But what do you mean relate? It's this all that other stuff is sitting up there saying, yo, let me do what I have to do. Yo, don't bother me in the process. Just let me live. That's basically what the brother is saying. Police officers are sent to do jobs for a reason. God damn.
This armed police only response that we have isn't working.
I understand, but it needs to be pragmatic.
Now, if this passes, it would also eliminate the minimum number of officers required by the city. It would also rearrange the leadership structure of this department under the mayor and city council, as opposed to just the mayor. The current elected officials would have 30 days to name an interim commissioner of the new Department of Public Safety, and the ones that are sworn in January would have the task of course, filling this department. And we've already seen enthusiasm, at least going to the polls so far. More people voted early in this election than in any municipal election we've seen here in the past 45 years. And of course, now is election day.
And before they continue, I just want to say this last thing. Of course, when it comes to defund the police, it's always going to be equivalent with something. My two foreshadows on this can only, I can only think of this. Number one, it's going to be to do without wilt now if they go ahead and say, oh, we don't want police officers. Secondly, they could replace the police officers with the DigiDog, which is a video I did way back when, especially with the technology advances of Boston Dynamics, okay? They could put it in Minneapolis and say, oh, well, this robot understands me well, or this figure understands me well. I don't have to worry about police officers being on my ass and, abusing me and getting on my nerves. This new technology is just, it doesn't even speak to me. You know what I mean? Oh, the patrols and this, that, and the third. This is why I did videos on technology, so you can connect it, because this is a reality that can come into your world as well. But at the surface level, defunding the police would only enact the do what thou wilt, and the whole entire scene from like The Purge or something like that.
Let's focus on Atlanta and Minneapolis in particular right now, because the political legacy of George Floyd, the focus on police reform, they're really in the spotlight in these two places.
Yeah, it's so fascinating, Kate, how much the pendulum has swung in that particular debate since just, last summer when we were seeing all the Black Lives Matter protests. In Atlanta, the spike in violent crime that they saw this summer has been such a concern for voters that you have the wealthy community of Buckhead looking to break off from the city because they say that crime is not under control. And so that's completely changed the conversation among the candidates. You've got former Mayor Kasim Reed.
And let me give my analysis on that as well. When they had the protests last year for George Floyd and all the events that added up to it, especially around the time when Karina really started to take off, my idea about it is all of that shit was planned. Okay, like I refuse to anybody to tell me different. It's always something that sat inside me. I just never really said anything. That was planned. The thing about it is that there were so many high depression levels and just this whole entire idea, I can't move anywhere, I can't do this, that, and the third. The elite said, okay, let these people just run outside, but we need to create a reason for them to actually come back outside into society. That's just my honest opinion. There was a reason why they had those protests happen. I'm not saying George Floyd's death made it that way, but there was always a reason. There's a reason behind everything. Because if it wasn't for that, the lockdown that happened last year, would it still continue into the summer? so that nobody could really go outside. Everything is like a roller coaster ride. Go outside, go back in. Go outside, low level rates of Karina, but then once you're outside, high levels start to come in again. And I'm pretty sure the likelihood of a lockdown is like abysmal, but you know, you can never be too sure. But to connect this back to what I'm talking about, I do believe it was planned. You understand? I definitely do believe that.
Who is trying to get another term as mayor, the city council president, Felicia Moore. Reed is arguing that the city needs to hire 750 more police officers. Moore is trying to strike a more careful balance between, police reform measures and the need for those. And then, in Minneapolis, obviously you have this fascinating question on the ballot, which is whether or not the city's voters will agree to dismantle their police department, get rid of the police chief and replace it with a Department of Public Safety. And that has created a split among the candidates. The current mayor, Jacob Fry, and the more progressive candidates, Sheila Nazad and Kate Knuth, who do want to dismantle the police department. And Fry saying, no, we can't do that. Crime is too much of a concern. We'd be starting from scratch. And it's going to be fascinating to see what the voters do today. When I was talking to sources over the weekend, they had no idea which way that measure was going to go on the ballot today, Kate.
People ask.
Okay, one tip we wanted to pass along.
And that's really it. I just give my analysis on that, the defund the police, all the connections and stuff like that. My whole entire theory is communism manifesto 101, the last days pretty much coming into fruition. People have their opinion, but my whole entire thing is, if it's going to allow for public safety, you have to start at a community base first. There has to be an agenda. There has to be a reason why you're doing what you're doing for the greater good of the community. You can't do it for a whole city. It's just not, it's not feasible, right? It's just not feasible. And especially if it's so-called Black men who's taken it upon themselves to say, hey, we need to do something for our community and this, that, and the third. I'm not against that. But at the end of the day, there always should be those board meetings of saying, let's have a community organization first, so that in the case something does happen where a police officer is conducting misconduct, there could be the chief meeting up with the chief of the village and being able to have a conversation on what could be done or how to come up with a process of exterminating the problem. You understand? Otherwise than that, if this is the go around the country, you can only expect the purge is going to happen. And then if you watch any of my videos, when I had talked about the police dogs, the DigiDog thing, that started in New York, it's gonna take place. Like I said, y'all can watch those videos about Boston dynamics to get a frontal view about what's about to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. Okay, but otherwise than that, peace.